Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session with your host, Michael Rearden.
So it's been a couple months since we welcomed a new member into our family, and it's a girl. Our first was a boy. And I started to ask myself this question. Well, what is the difference between raising a boy and raising a girl? Now, I understand they're still young children, right? They're still infants or toddlers. But the reality is, I'm going to raise them differently. And it's not so much that their personalities are different, which there will be different personalities. It's not so much that I want this one to be more privileged and this one to not, right? If we can think of like wages, right? They talk about pay equality, things like that. So they say men get paid more, even though that was disproven. It's not so much of saying I'm going to do a disservice to someone. It's more so of understanding of what each of them needs. Now, let's just kind of go in the whole premise of man and woman. A man is not born with his value versus a woman being born with her value. And I understand this is controversial because you might say, well, I'm not born with my value. I have to build myself up to who I am. And rightfully so. You do have to build yourself up to be more valuable in a sense. But if we can just kind of fast forward a little bit, and let's say maybe we're young adults now. Maybe we can drink. We are 21, we can drink. So you go to the bar. And I want you to go to the bar at this, figurative age. And I want you to raise your hand and say, all right, who would like to go home and, be with me tonight? Right? I mean, intercourse, right? Most of the girls in there, they're going to say, no, right? So maybe you might get out of 100 people in there, 1 to 5, right? That's going to be probably the statistic. But then if the roles were reversed and there was a woman who raised her hand and says, all right, I'm looking for a guy to go home with, she's going to have suitors out the wazoo. So out of the same 100, she might have around 30 to 40. Now, it might not seem like a huge discrepancy, but I'm sure it would be closer to 100, maybe 90, around there, if there wasn't the competition bias. Men view competition very differently because for men, there's an unwritten law that if I'm dealing with another man, essentially, there is always the proponent to violence. I was reading a book, and it was very interesting because it talked about the different types of hormones and the personalities. And basically, when it comes to like fight or flight, that mechanism we have, men are more willing to go violent to fight than for a woman to do it because she doesn't get anything from it. Like physically, like in her mind, like the chemicals that go on, she doesn't get anything from it. She would rather sit down and have tea. But it's not so much that she won't fight for what she loves. It's just that she's not hardwired to fight. And we're not even talking about like who's bigger and stronger and like the biological nature of men and women. We're just talking about how the mind is made up. So with all of this being said, we understand that men are going to fight. They're going to, put hands on. So the danger for most of the men, that's why I'm, being conservative, 40 to 50, maybe around there, are going to say, you know what? It's not worth the trouble, right? Oh, that guy is looking better than me. That guy has more money than me. So you automatically say, I'm not going to even pursue her, but I would like to. She can have all 100 guys lined up. Her value was given to her, essentially, right? She's born with that value, right? Just her being a woman, right? It's something that's something I want, right? It's a yearning for that. For guys, like we have to earn that status, right? If you ask a woman what she wants, typically, it's, I want a guy who's going to be, supportive, who can support me financially, physically, maybe even, right? Security. So those main things. And then, of course, there's going to be preference. I want him to be 6 feet tall, 6-pack abs, etc. No kids. I mean, we can go down the line of what someone would want in a person. But then if you just ask a guy, it's much more simple. I want a woman who can, give me kids and be my peace and make my house a home, right? The simple things. It's not so much of she needs to be the super model. She needs to be a 10 out of 10, needs to be smoking hot, because for men, what I have found is that beauty is not so much only in her makeup. It's not so much only in, how she looks, because a woman can easily put on layers of foundation and makeup and look like a totally different person. So we have to look deeper. How does she make me feel? Does she support my dreams? Is she, does she come from a good family, a good mom, a good dad, right? And, does she have good values? Because we can, see the good fits for men and we can see the bad fits for men very easily. But when it comes to choosing the right man for a lady, it's much more difficult if she doesn't have a father in the picture. Fathers have, taken a bad rap for being that optional thing in a child's life. So I can't tell you how many single moms there are because they just want to do it themselves. They have this very individualized or maybe even a feministic type of mindset of, I'm going to be the mom and I'm going to be the dad when it comes to raising a child, whether it be a son or a daughter. The daughters typically tend to be in a worse situation. So what they do in the teen years is they start to go and seek validation from other boys. I'm looking for the father I never had. And you probably have heard this, a girl with daddy issues. You don't necessarily hear a guy with daddy issues. You might hear a mama's boy, but then of course, it can always be a mama's girl too. But it's not necessarily, right? A girl has daddy issues and a boy can be a mama boy. Well, there's a reason for that, right? Cristiano Ronaldo, he's a soccer player. And when he was talking to his wife early on in the dating process, the girl asked, do you remember who your first love was? And, Cristiano says, yes, I know who it is. And then she was a little jealous and she wanted to know who it was. And then eventually Cristiano goes on to say, it's my mom. Because if my mom wasn't there to show me love and to appreciate me and to believe in me, I wouldn't be the person who I am. So I cannot forget her love. She was the first woman who I loved. So in a sense, a boy's first love is his mother, and he should seek, or not he should, but he often seeks that same type of figure in a woman he's looking to court, to marry. A woman typically would say, I'm looking for someone like my father. And for a woman, it's very simple to understand, what type of man you're around. And it's not so much that you ask him, because he's going to tell you what you need to hear or what you would like to hear, right? We can tell you lies all day long. It's more so in our actions. Are we doing what we say we're going to do? Are we just doing things to kind of get you to feel a certain way and then kind of moving on with our life once we got what we wanted? And that's going to be the majority of men. So we look at these boys who are mama boys, and girls will say, oh, it's a turnoff for me, right? He loves his mom so much, and it's just his mom does everything for him, but it's not so much that the mom is doing everything for him. It's just that the mom loves him so much, right? Because when it comes to a man, the only two people, or was one person who will love you unconditionally is your mother, maybe your grandmother. And then of course, if you get a dog, they're going to love you regardless. But when it comes to the condition of your wife, it is conditional. We can look at the statistics now. It used to be 50% of marriages. Now it's more like 40% because most people are not getting married today, right? Because people are learning, hey, why would I get married? Why would I put myself in this predicament where I can lose half of my stuff? So I'd rather just pay child support to someone. And that is essentially what men are doing today. It's not so much of marriage anymore. So this is why the number is declining. And if I had to raise a daughter to look at what she should be looking for in a man, and it's very simple, for me at least, that she should find someone who's going to do everything that I've done for her and maybe even more. There's a minimum. One of the things we have to understand when it's time for marriage is, if you have a son, your son retains the last name of the father of the family, but then a woman is going to take on the name of another man. And I'm not saying that she can't keep her maiden name. I'm not saying that she can't. But typically for those type of women who are not going to take the man's maiden name, this is advice for the men, not so much for the woman, because the women are not going to like this advice, is that she's probably not the best fit for you. And you might ask, well, why? Well, the reason is that she should be looking at, all right, I'm looking to start a family and build something with you, and I don't mind taking your name. Versus, well, I don't want to do the paperwork. Versus, this is my identity. This is what I feel comfortable with. Marriage is not comfortable sometimes. So it's about challenge. It's about struggles, sacrifice, whatever. But it's almost like, I'm going to give you this, and what are we going to get in return? So I understand that my daughter is not going to, keep on with the Rearden legacy. Yeah, sure, she might change her middle name to Rearden, which doesn't make sense, but she's going to most likely find a man, and she's going to say, hey, this is the man that I'm choosing to support and to be around. Now, there's very little that we have to look at when it comes to, like, if that, annulment, like if that marriage needs to be annulled. Abuse, right? Hard times, and then the person can't change and they won't change. Everyone has the ability to change, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will change. So you need to find someone, ladies, who is going to be resilient, who's going to not only fight for you, but fight for what they can create with you. A lifestyle, a family, whatever it be. For men, you want to find the opposite. You want to find a woman who's going to support you, all right? Who's going to be there, who's going to not only test you, but uplift you. And not test you in the sense of patience and like you have to hold back your punches, but it's going to challenge you to be a better man every single day. And typically that happens automatically if you are a supportive wife. But it's not necessarily taught how to be a wife or how to be a husband. We're taught to say, hey, you need to find this type of person rather than you need to become this type of person for this type of person. So that means essentially you are worried about how you can be the perfect husband. You are worried about how you can be the perfect wife rather than I'm looking for the perfect husband, the perfect wife, because you can go on all these red pill podcasts and you can say, hey, all these girls are talking about they want a guy that makes all this money, who has all of this wealth and, certain physical status, no kids. And she can definitely demand it because, again, her value is saying that she can have that, right? Like I said, going to the bar, she can raise her hand saying, who wants to come home with me? She's going to have a line full of guys. And there's always going to be a guy that will say, you know what? I'm going to give you what you want. Now, not saying that she's a bad fit or necessarily a good fit, because you can definitely roll the dice with those ladies. But I would rather have a girl, who works at a fast food spot, a girl who has nothing. And if I gave her everything and she decided, you know what, this is not for me and decides to take half of my stuff, great, whatever. It doesn't matter. For at least me, men in general too, it's not so much about her career or her income that we fall in love with. It's about the identity and the energy that we're feeling. Because if we're coming into, a partnership or relationship and we're saying, hey, you know what? I would love for this to happen. And if it doesn't happen, what do we do? One of the reasons why men are in sexless marriages is because they don't know how to say what they want. They don't know how to put their foot down. And it's not so much that you put their foot down to be a tyrant. It's just that, can you relay what you want, your expectations? If you cannot relay those expectations, then it's always going to be a problem of communication later on. And I was thinking about a mindset thing just last week, and I was figuring out when I was going to use this basically saying. And I thought, am I going to say it to a guest? And I say, no, it won't work for a guest. It has to be on a Wednesday episode, essentially, or it could even be a blog episode. But if I had to simply put how I would raise my son versus how I would raise my daughter is this. I would raise my son to love what he fights for. And I would raise my daughter to fight for what she loves. You might ask yourself, well, what is the difference, right? A man might not want to wake up in the morning and go to work and go to the oil fields and, be in a sewer full of sewage, or to, be an electrician or work with his hands and he gets cuts and bruises all day long. He might not want that type of job, right? Sure. maybe, he just wants a simple IT job, right? Maybe he wants to be a teacher, whatever it be. He can definitely choose that path. But men take on those roles typically. They become the blue collar workers. They become the electricians, the carpenters, the plumbers, the home builders. When's the last time you've seen a crew of women home builders? All right. And it's very similar to how if you saw a woman pilot, it would almost be off putting. And it's not so much that she's not capable, it's just that it is not, common. So the things that are not common are oftentimes things that we say, you know what, are different. So when a man is trying to fight for something, he's like saying, okay, well, what do I need to do? Well, he needs to love the struggle. He needs to love the building process, essentially. Because as I said early on, men have to build their value, women are given their value. So a man is already operating in a different mindset. That simply means that he needs to say, hey, if I love what I'm doing, I don't mind building. I don't mind growing. I don't mind the struggle. I don't mind the challenge. I don't mind the hardship. This is my mission. And as any man, you should definitely want to fulfill your mission. You should want to say, how can I accomplish what I would like for my life? Now, oftentimes men get in their own way when it comes to how they approach this. Number one, they think they can do it by themselves. They don't get a coach. They don't get a mentor. They give themselves this idea of change that they would like to change, but they don't do the steps in order to do it. They don't get skin in the game. So they will say, you know what, I need to change my life. I feel stuck. I feel like I hit a plateau. But then all of a sudden, it's like when when it's game time, they don't show up. So men are oftentimes a proponent of their own failure, of their own nature. When the reality is, if you can learn to love what you fight for, you wouldn't fall into this victimhood. You wouldn't fall into this mentality of, well, I hope things come, good things come my way, or things turn out my way, or a wonderful woman approaches me at the bar. We have to once again learn to be the hunters, because when you are building yourself up, you are learning, you are growing the knowledge, the wisdom, everything, and is hopefully instilled from another man. And I always talk about this. A boy, when he's looking to become a man, is always going to find another man to emulate. He's not going to look at his mom anymore. He's not going to look at his sister. He's going to look for a man, a father figure. It could be an uncle. It could be a rapper. It could be a teacher. It could be whoever, as long as they are a man. So then they say, okay, this is what a man is. And then this is where perception comes in, because you can be a terrible man and you can also be that role model for that person. Meaning, if you are an alcoholic, if you're a drunk, if you're doing drugs, that kid can say, I don't want that life, because I can see how hard you're living right now. I can see the hardship and the struggles and the challenges you're giving yourself. It's not so much that this is my example, I need to follow it. Now, sometimes that's going to be the case, but there's always perception when it comes to man. So love what you're fighting for. Love what you see. Love what you want. And then when you are there with that love, you won't be afraid to protect, right? If someone breaks in your house, you're not going to, tell your wife, like, okay, it's your turn. You're going to say, okay, it's time for business, right? Whether you're skilled or not skilled, it's time for business. When it comes to a woman, when she has to fight for what she loves, and you might say, this is so unfair. You have to fight. Why do I have to fight for what I love? Well, it's the opposite now, because you are given your value at a very young age, at birth. And so you have to understand that your value is given to you. So now the things that you love, or that you might think you love, you have to fight for them. And you have to fight to stay with that value. Because when it comes to a woman and partners, essentially, you have to ask yourself, how many partners does it take for a woman to lose that emotional connection with their spouse or whoever, right? Well, let me tell you the statistics. They're out. The research has already been done. It's 4.5 partners. Now, for men, we can disassociate, or what I found for men is that they can disassociate sex and the person, right? So for them, it's just sex. It's not an emotional connection. They're not getting down on one knee and saying, hey, I want to marry you. Now, sometimes you can have guys who are just looking for anything, right? Those are typically not the men you want, ladies. You don't want a man that's just going to accept whatever he gets. All right. My barber says this. He says, a job will get you by, a career will get you through. You want a man who has a plan. Now, the plan can maybe be ambitious, right? It could be, whoa, like, what are you trying to do? If he doesn't have a plan yet, I'm not saying he doesn't have one. Maybe he's building it, right? Maybe he's thinking about it. Maybe, he's ruminating on the different choices that he can make. But the end of the day is, he is not a project for you to say, hey, this is my project. This is my fixer-upper. Let me try to change this person, because a man won't change because you want him to change. He will change when he wants to change. Now, typically for men, we need the trauma, we need the hardship, we need the struggle in order to change. It could be a traumatic, like a death of a family member, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever. And it could be enough to say, you know what? I'm not afraid anymore to try to put myself out there. I'm not trying to be the hero anymore to everyone. In a sense, I like to think of myself as the villain. Yet most people who know me and how I approach them, they would never say that I'm the villain. But I say that I'm the villain is because I am going against the grains of pleasing people. We have to understand that it's not so much about being Mr. Nice Guy. It's about being the good man that you know you can be, and the good man that you know you are. Essentially, the destiny that awaits you is something that you have to want to see. And it's very easy to tell if a guy wants that destiny to be fulfilled. Now, if you are a woman and you have a guy who's in a career, who maybe is established, who's not really a go-getter, he's an average guy, you have to ask yourself, are you going to be okay if he doesn't change? That's essentially the question you have to ask yourself. Will you be okay if this man never changes in his life? If he doesn't make more than $50,000 a year, if he doesn't ever get in shape, if he doesn't ever, buy you flowers, would you be okay with that type of man? And if the answer is yes, then it'll be okay fit, right? Making sure, of course, your values align, a 7 out of 10 minimum. So that could be something that you do. However, most women, when it comes to traits in men, they want someone who's disciplined. They want someone who is a go-getter, someone who is seeking change. So that man should have a plan, right? And then you are not looking at him as a fixer-upper, because you will accept him at his highest and you will also accept him at his lowest. Because if he lost everything, would you say, I got to pack my bags and leave you? No, right? Now, not saying that every woman is going to be thinking that, but there are going to be some, right? We can say 12% around there will definitely run away when the money runs dry, when things are not good, right? Because it is a survival mechanism, right? It's a survival thing. It's in your DNA. You want the biggest and strongest guy that's going to protect you, that's going to give you the world, essentially. And you don't want someone who is not doing that. Or you don't want someone who is maybe not as ambitious as you, because you have built your career. Now you're the strong businesswoman. And of course, you can definitely want good in your life. You don't have to accept living in an apartment. You can live in a mansion if you want. You don't have to accept riding on the bus. You can get your own car. It doesn't matter what car, BMW, Ferrari, a Jaguar, whatever. You get to make that decision. And here lies the difference. The decision is you get to choose whatever you want, but how you choose should be very important. A man can choose and fail. A woman, if she chooses, is almost like it's much more difficult to get around, because we talk about how men and how women get over a relationship. A woman is going to, deal with the relationship, break up, like, oh man, like this sucks. Taylor Swift, I'm going to write some songs about the guy. I'm going to talk bad about him. I'm going to key his car, maybe, right? We can go down the list. I'm not saying you will do any of these things, but the reality is, you deal with those emotions head on, versus a guy just kind of like, well, I got hurt, I got burned. And he basically stays there. And it ruins the man, right? When it comes to him loving. So this is why many men will dissociate, emotions in the person that they're with. unless they say, you know what, this is a person I want to protect. This is a person I want to marry, a person I want to be in my life forever. That can ruin a man. Essentially, you want someone in your corner who is going to not only support you, but believe in you. Because if you can't even believe in a person, then you're, setting yourself up for years of hardship. And it's not so much about only the money. Money can always be made. We can always get a job. We can always work some extra hours. We can always, figure out a business thing. And we might be, a person that fails, right? And it's okay to fail, right? We are building ourselves up, especially men. You're building yourself up. It's okay to fail, right? Women, when it comes to, failure, you're still building yourself up, but it comes with a different type of mindset. When you're building yourself up as a woman, this is where community is so powerful. You have sisters, you have, your mom, your relationship with your mom, you have, your relationship with your peers and coworkers that might be other women who are successful, and then you can confide in them. Men don't necessarily, talk about their feelings when they go on fishing trips. They talk about sports. They talk about everything that is not pertinent to their emotional well-being. A woman will say, okay, this is what is going on. I'm trying to emotionally regulate. And then you have a support system. Men don't necessarily have that support system. So you need to be very careful of the people you keep around you, both sides, right? Because if you're a man and you keep people who can't see or understand, what you're going through, sure, you can get a coach to supplement, but at the same time, that's not their responsibility when it comes to you. So you don't necessarily put people in your circle who are going to make sure you feel okay or make sure that, you're taken care of. You want people who are going to challenge you, people who are going to, be that support system to say, hey, you got this, you can do it. And even if you fail, to not say, I'm going to abandon you because you failed. Women, on the other hand, if you fail, right, they're going to say, well, he's a jerk, whatever, in, marriage or whatever, in a job. Hey, I know someone, right? So it's always that support. Let me see how I can help. But I go back to my initial question. How would I raise my son and how would I raise my daughter? I would raise him to be a warrior. But a warrior, not so much in the sense of being a lone warrior, but being a warrior in part of battle, to build his army, to conquer the world, his world, whatever world he would like to create for himself. For my daughter, for her to understand that, she is this precious resource that can be misused if she allows it. So she must give herself a mindset to be resilient and to be wise in how she chooses partners and peers also. She doesn't necessarily want a guy in her life that's going to tell her all these nice things when her hormones are raging, but more so, my dad has taught me what to expect, and he has set the bar, right? I know there was a comedian that talked about this. He basically says, if my dad did that, it would be so much better. Or if my dad did that, it will be done already. And it's not so much that she's comparing her man to her dad, but understanding that there's a bar that needs to be set for every man that enters her life. And if he can't come up to that bar, then he's no good, right? The expectations, because if he truly loved what he has to fight for, essentially, he would meet the expectations. And it's not that he will change. And it's not that he will change. The expectations is what he's fully capable of. He doesn't have to change. He's already capable of it. But does he do it? So there is a difference in how you should be raising your sons, how you should be raising your daughters. You can put them both in martial arts. You can teach them both to be tough. But then, when it comes to the battles you give them along the way, you should give those boys a lot more battles. All right. You should give them a lot more chores. You should give them a lot more moving pieces. It's not so much of, okay, I'm going to teach you the same as I teach her, or vice versa. I'm going to teach you the same as I teach him. For example, boys need to move when they learn. Yet we throw them in a classroom and we say they have ADHD. For a woman, she can sit down. For a little girl, she can sit down and color, and she can read and do all of these things, and it's very different than a guy. And you can go on YouTube, you can go on TikTok, you can look at these videos of people saying there was such a difference between the boy and the girl, or people who have two boys and then they have friends that have girls or something. And they say, my boys are feral. They're jumping off. They're yelling. They're screaming. They're fighting. They're doing all of these things. And I'm wondering, like, what did I do, Lord, in order to, get this, to get this hand? And they look on the other side and they say the grass is greener. They say, oh, look at the girls. They're sitting down. They're playing nicely and they're having tea and they're getting along and they're sharing and they're so happy. It seems like they're not fighting, but we're different. And if you can't understand that we're different, then you're going to raise them in the wrong light. So we have to figure out what light we would like to raise them. You can raise a woman to be a warrior, sure. You can raise a woman to be independent, sure. But is that where she shines? So yeah, sure. We're going to raise children differently. We're going to have different personalities. We're going to raise boys different than we do girls. And there's nothing wrong with that. You figure out what your kid needs, what your child needs, and then you basically bring out their skill, their talent, their meaning for being alive. Because we all have different inklings and personalities and brave patterns. So why would we say, hey, I'm going to be stringent on what you do and how you do it? They're their own person, and you must be able to guide them to that person, and you help them avoid many of the pitfalls that we can see happening every single day to not only the boys, but the girls too.